We think about the media and entertainment industry as three parts. There is OTT, which I'm sure you're all familiar with, the Netflix, Prime Video, Z5, etc. Then there is linear TV, which is what we watch on our Reddit box. And then there is movies, right? So that's the gamut of media and entertainment. The reason why I said what I said is because COVID was a disruptive factor which changed India 3 downwards also.
Our illustrious Shweta Bajpai, 17 years of experience, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you, Jashi. It's fun to be here. And thank you for narrating it.
It's always
so interestingly.
Yeah.
I wish I had this chalked out when I started. I clearly didn't. So as you would probably discover during the conversation, a lot of what happens during your career is a mix of opportunity and circumstances. And when the two coincide is when magic can happen. But you have to let life take its course. And a lot of those choices have been like that. So lovely to be here. Such a beautiful campus, totally not like my B school for sure. My B school is in the wilderness with lots of lakes, lots of trees, but no jazzy campus. So amazing to be here and wonderful to be with all of you.
Amazing. So, Shweta, you mentioned that you're passionate about mentoring first generation women professionals.
Correct.
So, are you also first generation women professional? That's
Yes.
where the drive comes from?
Yeah, I mean, see, when I started my career, it was, I think women had started working, Jayashree, but the kind of professions they would generally engage in would be becoming a teacher, becoming a doctor. You could get them in probably a little bit lower than mid-manager role, and after that, everyone will peter out, right? Like a good example is my own batch of girls from IIT. So the campus that I went to has very poor gender ratio, it still stays. But in a batch of 400, we were 14 women. And out of the 14 women, 12 of them don't work right now. So it's just 2 of us who actually have continued to work and have a career, because it was just very hard at that point in time and not even considered mandatory for you to have a career, even though you might have gone to the most premier engineering institution in the country. So I think that's what we were faced with. I felt this need for figuring out how to help first generation women professionals, because when you're a woman professional, there'll be a lot of times in your life where you'll have to make the harder decision.
Right.
This job is taking me away. I am never at home. Maybe I have a boyfriend or a husband who's complaining that I'm never there. Maybe when I have kids, then the kids never see me there. So is it even worth having a career? Maybe I'll give up. Now, if you don't have someone who can, kind of just tell you that it's fine, it's just 2 or 3 years, it'll all get better over a period of time, 99% chance you will give up. And I had the same question at many points in my career, which is why I feel so strongly that women who have finally made this great choice to study well, get into a career, got into a great job or a great organization, they should have enough support, enough allies around them who can just tell them it becomes easier over a period of time.
A bit sad how things have not exponentially changed in the past 2 decades. So you were the only 2 people, women in the batch who are still working. You're also a single child, first generation women worker. You disrupted the industry 2 decades ago after being the first female hire by Bharat Forge company. Shweta, what changes it brought to your leadership style?
It's a good question, Jayashree. And I would say for a lot of people who come from, two or three dimensions, right? So being a woman is one part of it. I don't think anyone can choose. You're either born a woman or you're not. But a lot of us who come from, I would say, smaller cities, also come from backgrounds where your parents might not be engineers or professionals themselves. My mother's a teacher and my father used to work in a bank. None of them have done engineering or MBA or digital, like we're very far away from all of that. And Kanpur is a decently smaller city. It's not like a Delhi, for example. I think you're always on the back seat, right? In some ways or the other. Like nobody expects you to have a great career. Nobody expects you to make it big. So when you do get a chance, and that chance is harder than if you were in a Bombay or a Delhi, right? Like I've seen the kids from Bombay or Delhi, even at my time, they used to be far more assertive. They would always have a voice. They would always know कि सिर्फ doctor or engineer नहीं बनना है. There are 10 more careers you can do. But if you're from a small town, ideally those are the only 2 careers your parents speak about, which are worth cracking. You crack into it, then also you don't know what you do next. So I think the pressure to prove yourself is far more. you're always on the back seat because you don't have as many choices. Also, the ecosystem around you is far more conservative. People don't expect the word out of you, especially if you're a woman, especially if you know there is not so much money flowing in the house. So everybody's trying to make choices on saying, oh, why would you need to go to the US and do a degree? Like, just stay in India, do something. So some of those adversities, I think, create this need to prove yourself and almost question the norm. So from my leadership style, I think one of those things that I've always felt very strongly about is if somebody tells me this is how it's going to be, I believe I'm probably the best placed person to question why not. Like, why couldn't it be anything else? If somebody tells me it's very hard for us to think about like a digitized organization, I would say, why not? And let me come and prove to you otherwise. Because you have yourself somehow gone against many norms or stereotypes in order to build your own journey. So, probably that one.
So I think why nots are, I think it's necessary. Irrespective of your gender, irrespective of where you work, why nots are definitely necessary. You have been very non-linear about your professional journey and you have pivoted when necessary, and we as a generation share that in common with you. What do you think? How do we navigate through these career options? Because I'm pretty sure that most of us have been on the crossroads of the best career path. I don't think there's anything like a best career path. But while you are there, while you're just choosing, what should be in your back mind? How should you think about it?
Yeah, so I think everyone would draw us like very complex career maps. This is what I'll do 1 year, 3 year, 5 year, 7 year, 10 year. Doesn't work, goes nowhere. So stop building career maps. I think it's a bad idea. Not because future planning is not good, but we are living in times, and you guys are so lucky, so privileged that you're living in times that are completely changing. So careers that are seen to be like pick of the bunch at this point in time might not even be relevant 3 years later. I mean, a good example is consulting. When I chose consulting, it was considered to be like, the best career you can actually pick in your life. And now there is a clear question on saying a lot of the P0 of consulting, which is, let's say, analytics, putting together the data, or let's say building beautiful slides, AI can do so. Why do you need consultants? So, one thing I would really suggest is, given these amazing times you guys live in, where choices are changing dynamically, don't build very long career maps for yourself. Second, I would really suggest instead of focusing on a job, focus on a skill. And there's a subtle difference between the two. So, first of all, think about what skill do you want to build and that you're really, really passionate about, you really like doing. Um, I'll give you an example. When I chose to work in the steel plant, it's not because I wanted to be on the shop floor making steel. It's not like a glamorous profession by any stretch of imagination, but I really wanted to see everything that I learned in engineering. What could it do to really change the industry? So I have learned right now on amazing ways to do nanoparticles on steel. It's very good in the books, but what does it mean for the industry? So I really wanted to put myself in shoes where I could see the commercial aspect of my engineering and get to change the industry. I figured in 1 year, wo ho nahi sakta, so I should go find another job, but it was a chance worth taking. So I would still suggest the dimension you should always over index on a skill rather than the job you want to go in. And if you do that, I think the good thing that will happen is there'll be less dissatisfaction when you get into a role. So many times, jobs that look amazing from outside, when you get into that role, you realize, oh, this is exactly what my last job was, which was also boring. So you might not enjoy it. Then you're looking for your next gig and your next gig. And then it becomes those, kind of rolling turnover where finally the answer is, let me do my startup because no other job fits. If you don't want to get into that kind of a place, rather choose the skill you want to build. So, in the job that you go in, there should be something that you don't know that actually excites you, that you can spend time learning. It's very good to choose something that you're good at, but that should be 30% of the role. 70% should be what you can learn in the role.
Makes sense. So, while we are very grateful that you're here as our mentor, did you also have someone to look up to back in all of these organizations? And while you talk about openly about having a fantastic set of mentors at BCG, is it always like one set of mentors, or does it keep changing with time, or you only have like a fixed set of mentor that you've been looking up to for the past 2 decades? So we are in a B school, and thanks to Masters Union, we have an array of fantastic set of mentors. It's a buffet. We can choose industry, we can choose sectors, companies. It's right there. But the point is, how do you do that? The question comes in, how do you choose the right set of mentor? So, your insights.
Yeah, so I think there is no one set of mentors, Jayashree. I think depends also on the stage of career you're in. Um, Back in college, like even before college, right, when I made the choices that I do, a lot of it was, I think, inspired by my mother. My mother has been a cricketer for the Indian team. She gave up her cricketing career, but it's one of those things she felt very passionate about, that you should break norms to do something that really excites you. And that's what I learned. So finally, I went in and wrote the JEE. Nobody in my family or even in my city had ever written JEE. They'd never seen a girl doing a JEE exam, but I really wanted to do it because I thought, let's have fun, let's see what will happen after that. And I figured it opens net new doors. So that is one kind of mentor. The other kind of mentor that can really work for you, which I think happened to me back in back at the time when I was at BCG. So at BCG, we actually do not really have a reporting structure. We work on projects, and the projects could be 3 months, 6 months, 1 year. It could be couple of years, right? So depending upon the stretch of the project. And many times when project teams come together, you might get into situations where a partner really likes working with you, you really like working with the partner, for example, and they become kind of your official mentor, unofficial guide, right? So a lot of it is chemistry. Like you should look up to the person, and the person should have interest and time to guide you. Obviously, that's the first and important criterion. Second, the person should understand what drives you. So at least at BCG, a lot of people were much more interested in, for example, can they go outside India to do ambassadorship? A lot of people were interested in saying, can I get to do projects that are closer to my place of living so that I travel less? How do I get to the next role, faster than others, which are also very good goals. But for example, my goal was, as I said, right, like I've always indexed on skill building. I really wanted to do something which was unique, which helps build a skill set that stood apart in the organization. And I think I chose the mentors who understood this is what drives me, this is what I'm good at. And that really helped navigate my time at BCG much better because they told me the choices that I could make. So between, let's say, a project which was a 2 years cost optimization project with, let's say, the largest conglomerate in India versus choosing, let's say, to work on a project with a digital startup where we were trying to tell them what other categories they can go into. This person could tell me choose the other project, right? Because it's aligned to your area of interest. You're trying to build a specialization. The specialization can actually help you later on in life. Now, that guidance is valuable, right? Like nobody else will ever be able to tell me or give me that kind of advice, which helps me make those decisions. So, at that point in time, those mentors are amazing. The kind of mentors that I speak to right now are the ones which give me a lot more advice on organizational behavior. I run a large org, and many times, as I'm sure you read in behavioral science, and you would realize behavioral science is the most valuable subject later on in life from your MBA school. But how do you manage your team's behavior so that they are productive, but at the same point in time, they are able to keep their eyes open, pick up best practices from other places? That becomes a very important topic of mentorship because it's one of those things all leaders struggle with, on how do you direct your own energy, right, to doing the day to day versus doing the longer term. So, as I said, different stages of your career, you will have different mentors. The idea is there has to be someone who is able to understand what drives you. Because otherwise, if it's a mentor that's giving the same advice to, let's say, everyone, it might not work for you. So, your unique skills, strengths, and passion should be understood by your mentor.
So, what do you think are the long-term trends, both in terms of performance marketing, which is your side, and consumer behavior, which is my side?
So, Jayashree, I mean, consumer behavior actually has been evolving across the world over the last many years, right? I'm talking about the last 6 to 7 years. One of the reports that I closely follow is the Mary Meeker analysis of digital behavior. Um, and it's a wonderful report. It gets published every year. And if any of you are research minded, it's a very good thing to read because it kind of tells you how time spent on digital is varying. Where is it that people are spending time on digital? What are they consuming? How much is digital payment really evolving? How much are people moving from feature phone to smartphone? So very cool data. Like I love it. And by country market. If you look at that report, some of these consumer behavior, like people moving from actually cutting cable connections to moving to just connected TV or consumption on their mobile, has been happening in the US for the last about 10 years. Now, we as a market are far more sticky, right? Because one of the things that we talk about in consulting as well as, in digital circles is that India is actually not one India, right? It's many Indias.
Yeah, it's India
But
1, India 2, India 3.
exactly.
Yeah.
So the India 1, India 2, India 3 really means India 1 doesn't behave like US, but kind of behaves like Singapore, right? So many behaviors are almost the same. We want to buy the same brands, like you would buy an H&M or Gap, Zara, whatever, same thing that Singapore buys. But then there is an India 3, and an India 3 still consumes content on TV. India 3 still goes to the grocery store and buys. They don't do Blinkit and they don't do like Milk Basket or whatever, right? So there's a huge gap between India 1 and India 3. Now, the reason why I said what I said is because COVID was a disruptive factor which changed India 3 downwards also. If you did not have the means to go to a grocery store, if you didn't have the means to go and do a recharge, where else will you do a recharge? You will go to your UPI, you will learn how to do recharge. You will learn how to do Amazon because there is nothing else that actually delivers. You will also realize you have a lot of free time sitting at home. So there's just that much TV you can watch. So you will move to OTT, you will start binging OTT, you will start looking at reels. So which is why how you binge, how you consume, and how you buy and shop, everything changed during COVID. And some of those behaviors have been sticky, some of those have not. So what does that mean is like those 2 years that we were all in COVID, we did a lot of things that we don't do anymore, right? A lot of us, for example, I'm sure you heard about, they were doing online classes. People were doing music online, coding online. Clearly not happening, right? Now there are physical classes people get sent to. So some of the behaviors have been sticky. I would say consumption, media consumption has been a sticky behavior. It has actually not changed. Time spent on video, time spent on OTT, time spent on reels, which is my industry. I clearly see that behavior is sticky. That's not changing. But a lot of the behavior around, let's say, consuming services which have a physical alternative, they have bounced back. The way India shops is somewhere stuck in the middle. So not everything, for example, Amazon has seen, for example, a stagnancy in terms of their shopping volumes. So has Flipkart, but it's not come down.
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah. So that's what I meant by what I said.
And definitely one of the insights is the shorter attention span.
Yes, correct.
I think there was a report with BCG, the big picture.
Yes.
Yeah, I read through it and has it anything to, there was also video about it on YouTube.
Yeah.
So has it anything to do with your experience with BCG, or like BCG was super interested in it?
Not really. I mean, it was a business problem that I was trying to solve. And the business problem is, if you look at the media and entertainment industry, we think about the media and entertainment industry as three parts. There is OTT, which I'm sure you're all familiar with, the Netflix, Prime Video, ZEE5,
Yeah,
etc. Then there is linear TV, which is what we watch on our Idiot box. And then there is movies, right? So that's the gamut of media and entertainment. Digitization has clearly happened in OTT. I mean, they think digital, they build digital, they market on digital, but nothing has really happened on linear TV. Nothing's happened really on movies. You still see billboards talking about, the next movie in town. You still see long trailers for 5 minutes. Who's watching those long trailers? So one of the things that I've been very passionate about for last couple of years is, because I've worked in the media and entertainment industry now for a really long time, both with BCG as well as in Google and now, that I feel there has to be something that disrupts the way even those content are marketed or taken to customer.
Yeah.
And the best way to do that, or think about decision makers to think about how to change that, is actually build a consumer point of view to it. So that's the reason I went to BCG and said that we should collaborate to put together a consumer research where we can understand that actually even housewives, let's say, which is the assumption a lot of media companies have, when they're watching linear TV, they actually are not going on Instagram, which was totally untrue.
Yeah.
We figured during the research that even if I'm watching, let's say, a Kumkum Bhagya or whatever, series on TV, I still want to go in and search for the actors on Instagram, see what is happening behind the scene. But there's actually nothing available, because the assumption the media world has is there is this woman sitting at home, which has nothing to do on digital.
Yeah.
She's only watching my TV like 24 hours, or she's max to max watching like a newspaper. That
Very
is what
good
she's
insight.
consuming.
That's very
So
good
there are
insight.
consumer archetypes in the mind of the industry which had to be broken. Or like movies, right? Like your generation, I'm sure you don't watch 5-minute trailer. Who has the time? So you want the message in like 30 seconds, right? But nobody is building trailers in 30 seconds. So the whole idea was, how do you make the industry think that the consumer has actually moved on? They have not. And they need to therefore evolve both their content as well as how they market in line with consumer
So
expectations.
is Meta planning any disruptions, as you said every time and again?
We are,
Someone has to
on the
disrupt.
back of the report, we've been able to convince couple of like movie producers to think about their movie marketing differently. And we have done that with like 3 or 4 movies. We did that with Fighter in January. We did that with Kingdom of Planet of Apes recently, with Deadpool. So where you will go in with the producer, director, and the team to come in and say, how is it that you can present this movie differently on digital?
Right.
Um,
So, I mean, while this is on the entertainment side, and it's
Yes.
actually a lot of movies first release their teaser on Instagram now and then they move forward to YouTube.
I don't think so as much, but
Okay.
yes, hopefully.
Hopefully we'll get
a
there.
lot
We'll
more.
get
Yeah,
there.
we'll get there.
Definitely. So you right now lead 5 different very diverse domains at Meta.
Correct.
How do you figure out that you synergize strategy in each of them? Because I understand that Meta has a very lean team, but again, such diverse, and even though they have Meta in common, but the domains are very diverse. How do you strategize that?
Yeah, so first of all, assume 90% is taken care of by the team, which is the day-to-day, the operations, making sure that clients get what they need, make sure that the business runs smoothly, make sure that the campaign briefs are attended to, job of the team, right? You have to first of all step back and figure out what is your job, right? So my job on media, for example, is thinking about not where 90% of my business, which is coming from OTT, will it continue to come or not, but where will that 10% come from? And how am I building the business for 2 years, 4 years, 6 years? How am I influencing, for example, CEOs to make sure they look at my platform differently? How do they try innovation that's different? How am I looking at other markets? So, for example, I would go to US Netflix and I'll figure out, what is Netflix doing in the US? What can I bring into India? That's my job. So, first of all, I think it's very important to figure out what's your job and what's not your job. So, the running day to day is not my job, it's taken care of. I'll only come in where my team needs help. I mean, they're obviously not alone. If they get stuck, if there's a place where their budgets are stuck, if the consumer's not moving, somebody's unhappy, they'll obviously call on for help. But I'm there only to think the longer term. Or on financial services, my team would run the day to day, which is a very, very complex book, very regulation heavy, very terminology heavy. But my job is possibly to work with my policy team to say, how can we change some of the rules governing how financial services do digital?
Right.
How can we make that easier for them? So I'll go meet with RBI, with my policy team, to see they understand my platform better. What can I offer in terms of help? So first of all, thinking through what our role is, which is actually the 10% and not the 90%. To your questions, I think because of my diversity of verticals, the 10% also becomes challenging, because doing this in financial services versus media is chalk and cheese. And in order to do that, I usually use a strategy which is basically, I divide my 4 weeks into saying which of my weeks are actually dedicated to what part of my business. And that gives me clean space to think through. I actually try and give my 200% in that 1 week, which is meant for that one specific business. I will try and do as many meetings as I can with decision makers and stakeholders for that specific vertical in that specific week. So it keeps my plate clean, instead of trying to crunch that I'll do everything in the same day and that everyone should get their share of the pie. It never happens.
That's very good insight. So at this point, we usually our first semester has in-class and out-class. All of our semesters, the course is divided into in-class and out-class. So in-class is basically what we study in the classrooms. Out-class is usually a challenge, differs term to term. This term, it is drop shipping. So we have to earn 10 lakhs in revenue minimum to get that out-class grade. Otherwise, we don't pass the term.
Got it.
So a lot of things on our plate, but this is a very good strategy to manage time. Also, this one thing that I've seen you on a lot of external panels on your LinkedIn and YouTube. How do you help in expanding partnerships and collaborations in Meta's digital ecosystem? Like, what is your role there?
Yeah, so Jashi, the definition of my verticals, because as you just said, right,
Yeah.
my businesses don't have a tying logic. One of the big tying logic is we have a lower share of attention, share of budget across all my verticals. So
Right.
FinServ is very search heavy. I mean, for all the right reasons, right? When you look
Right.
for your insurance, you first go search. So they're doing the right thing. but these are established behaviors that need to change. I just told you about media. It's the same way. It's the same way on real estate. It's the same way on travel. So one of the things that I think is very important to my job is how do you create advocacy, knowledge, and influence for my verticals? Because I have to break into one advertiser doing something unique, and then the industry will replicate, right? So, for example, if I am able to show a bank that is able to build their brand on Instagram, which is a low attention span, not very long form, not very HD graphics, not very advertising looking like ads that you see. If I'm able to get a brand to do that, the industry will take notice.
Yeah.
And when they take notice is when they will go in, they'll try out
Replicate.
something else, right?
Yeah.
So it's very, very hard work. It's like you're digging a well
basically-
every time, but it's a lot of fun because you get to do stuff that has never been done before. And a lot of the stuff, therefore, that I do on panels, that I do on external speaking engagements, is to ensure that there is better knowledge in the ecosystem, that we have a solution set, that solution set works, and we are willing to help. So anytime I go to the panel, we always get a reach out. We are always able to at least crack something out of it. And that gives us a lot of joy, right? Because it's one step every time.
So basically, you step out one day and then you create a ripple effect for things as a part of your job.
Oh, I hope it was that easy to describe it.
No, you
But
really
yeah,
do.
one step at a time.
But you definitely inherited the disruptor part from your mother. That is a very interesting story. Have you ever considered that you should work on a biography? You should like do an at-length podcast on your personal journey, because trust me, Shweta, it is it's uncommon, and it's not every day that we come across women like that, and it's not every day that we come across women who have the courage to do what you've done. Trust me.
Yeah, no, I think, thank you, Jayashree, for saying that. But I feel a lot of you also have great stories. So that's the one thing I would share. You don't know your story is great till you don't start telling it. I
Definitely.
can also tell you like 200%. I didn't figure out my story was unique until 5 years back when I actually started telling it. And there was a reach out, I think similar reach out that happened. This was a partner that I was working with. We started talking, we made friends. So I started telling them about where I was born, what happened, etc., etc. And they said, oh, this is such an interesting story. And we want to do a video series on it. And when I did the video series, a lot of what I was saying was like, I think it's useless. I don't want to share.
Oh, come on.
And that's when I figured that a story, when told well, actually has a lot of power. And it always
Definitely.
warms my heart when, especially, there is a woman who will come up and say, I heard your story. It resonates with me. I've had the same journey and I was really wondering where to go after this. And it kind of showed me that I could also do it. And that's very, very nice. It's the most fulfilling part of one's career when you hear that someone's taken even one piece and said, if you could do it, I could also do it. So yes, you all have stories.
Yes.
So first of all, if ever everyone tells you, oh, you were always privileged and you were bound to get there, it never happens. So be always courageous and open enough to share your story. You never know what you will chance upon.
And then you self-rejected your own video series. Come on. Now we'll open the floor for questions.
Sure.
Guys, questions, anything? Yes, Atithi.
Ma'am, at your time at Google, how do you balance the global strategy initiatives with the need of the local market adaptability, as you have discussed in your paper?
Yeah, so Aditi, my role at Google was actually the strategy head for a global org. So this was any which ways a global org. My team was also global. The need for the local market actually wasn't that critical because at least at that point in time, India was a very small part of the overall digital revenue that we were trying to manage. We would always depend a lot upon the sales team for feedback. So any nuances, right? Like we should think about strategy roles as very data, facts, analysis, and insight based, right? So we should never go out of that to say, I will bring in point of views. Point of views are supposed to be market led. So I think the one thing that I clearly learned was make sure that you have a very strong channel with the sales team because they are your eyes and ears on the ground. They know customer feedback. They know whether a product is working or not. They know if there is a safety issue, right, with any of our product. So making sure that there is a clear line to the sales teams. So we would always, as the strategy team, spend 1 to 2 days every month immersing with the local teams. And that's just not India. We would do that with the Europe team, we would do that with the US team to understand what are their pain points and feed that back into global strategy.
I had a question. Basically, you had this experience of being in consulting, right? And then you pivoted down to going into this product role and Google. So, what were the pivot points for you that led to you transition from this consulting role to these roles? Because many of us wanted to understand how you should understand or note down the steps that are very much necessary to make this transition.
Sure. That's a good question, Aditya. So in consulting, I mean, first of all, it's my favorite job out of everything that I've done. Like wonderful people and amazing company. So highly recommended if you ever get the chance to work at BCG. In BCG, I think I was quite fortunate, Aditya, because I think after about 5 years doing the normal generalist consulting roles, I picked upon doing a digital project, which is what Jayashree was mentioning. And that just happened to me. I loved the piece of work, and somehow that report, because it was so new and the first time we ever did that kind of a piece of work, we sold a bunch of projects on the back of it, which I got to do because I was the only person who was running the projects. And I figured I really like it. And these kind of projects were like digitizing a traditional media house. I mean, all of these are known players right now, but taking, let's say, a traditional media company, they were trying to build a digital arm. We got involved in actually building that digital arm. Somebody was like a digital startup, one of the big marketplaces right now, trying to get to understand their competition, change their supply chain. So it's very, very different work than the usual consulting work that I was doing before, right? Which is again org, operations, cost, that kind of a piece of work. So I got to do a lot of cool digital work. And then the company clearly saw that I was doing all of this variety of work, which was beyond TMT, which was my practice area. My practice area was telecommunication, media, and technology. But they figured that because this piece of work could be valuable to so many industries, they allowed me to become like a horizontal digital expert. So then I started doing digital projects in industrial goods, digital projects with financial services companies, and that was super exciting. So after you do 4-5 years of that, you don't want to get into a place where you're doing this 10%, you're doing the 90% as BAU. And that's where I think my moment of reckoning came. I really wanted to do digital. And that was not really a choice there. And they had their own constraints because it wasn't that big a revenue line where they could just dedicate a partner's time on digital. It wasn't logical. And therefore the push was, oh, you do this 10% and you do this 90% rest of work. And I said, doesn't make sense. I would rather then go and work for a digital company where I can learn more. Because I clearly knew that I understand the consumer part of digital. I know the business part of digital, but I don't know the product part of digital. And I really wanted to build skills in that area. And that's the only reason I went to Google. I actually went from being someone was managing 12 to 14 people. I was a principal, got promoted to partner internally. All of that was in place. And I went to do an IC role. I actually went to do an individual contributor role. I wasn't a manager when I went to Google. But I took that call because I really wanted to understand product. And I was very clear at that point in time that none of the other criteria matter as long as I am able to build the skill that I need. So that's the reason why I took the role and the logic behind it.
So, do you think, Shweta, that even when we do not know what the whys are, why do we want to do something, what do we want to do, at least we must be aware of what we do not want to do? Or is it like
yes
you
or
don't...
no, Jeffrey? I would kind of say always keep an open mind. Like when I am evaluating roles, I look at actually a variety of roles. So when I did choose the role at Google, I actually went and interviewed with about 4 or 5 startups. I met a couple of VCs and this role at Google. And the only thing I was indexing upon was where is it that I'm able to build that skill, right? I just told you whatever I'm looking to do. I was looking to do a role that focused me on digital. I was looking at a role that helps me build product knowledge. And then I went in and evaluated everything. And every role had its own nuance, right? Something gave me like a 30 people team. Something gave me a CXO title. Somebody said, I'm going to get a very large carry component of the role, but nothing else matters, right? Because what really matters is where is it that the 2 criteria that you're looking for meet? That I still do 90 to 95% of my work on digital and I get to understand product really well. So I would always say, like, whenever you're looking at options, please interview in multiple places so that you are sure about what you're looking for. If it's the first role that you chance upon and you pick it and you're just trying to validate in your mind that it makes sense, I don't think it'll ever play out well.
Right. So basically, there are broadly two buckets, the interest bucket and the skill bucket, and you have to keep an open mind to
Right.
develop both of them with time.
Correct.
But at the present moment, you should be doing something that aligns with
Yes.
both. So that's broadly the way we approach it. Any other questions? Himanshi.
Hello, ma'am. Thanks for doing such an insightful session. My question comes from a personal aspiration. So, like beyond like 5 years, I have worked in digital and media itself, right? But I still find myself, seeing this industry evolving a lot, and I'm still trying to, find my way. I totally know that digital and media is good, but I'm still finding my way, around in this industry. And you coming from the same background, I'd really like to know that what do you think this industry has more to offer? Or what are those, how do I say, those areas or that one could actually see evolving that I could also look up to in the coming years, basically?
Yeah, so Himanshi, media is like in a perfect state of churn, at least in India. And that has to do with both how industry is evolving, how models are changing, and we'll get a bit technical here. But as you know, the shift between S-word, A-word, T-word is hugely evolving, right? So nobody really knows what the future is. I remember 7 years back, we kind of said S-word is the future, which is where a lot of subscription models came into play. Very recently, 1 year back, we've started saying, oh, actually, S-word can't go deep into India. It's actually A-word. Very recently, 6 months back, people are saying, oh, it's neither S-word, it's not A-word, it's actually T-word. So yeah, media is in a perfect state of churn right now. However, this is also the time where I would believe a lot of barriers to how media is thought about will change, because the consumer behavior, as I said, right, is completely evolving. We are looking for very different type of content. And if you look at all different platforms, I don't think anybody does a perfect job of catering to the content that you like, right? At the same point in time, digital, for example, and if you look at the media side of digital, that's also changing. I think it's primarily changing because of AI. A lot of the marketing job, even in digital, right? It's the same as offline. Used to be a lot of bespoke marketing. Like people used to think about, I'll build a campaign with a purpose, then I'll make it as beautiful as I can. I will get all celebrities on it, and then I will mount it up. I will run it for 3 minutes, and the world will watch it, right? Not happening anymore. So clearly, what is really happening at this point in time is a lot of these norms are breaking. We now know that we don't follow celebrities anymore. There are celebrities on Instagram, which are more influencers, right, rather than celebrities. You're not wanting to look at anything for 3 minutes. More than 30 seconds is very hard to gain attention on. You're looking at also creatives or ads that are more funny rather than selling, right? So it's changed the definition of how marketing has evolved. So I would say this is a perfect time for someone with like a fresh set of thoughts to enter the industry, but there'll be a lot of flux. So you have to like prepare yourself for it.
Sakshi.
Hi, ma'am. Ma'am, today I guess all of us know the power of digital media and the awareness and change that it actually brings to people, given the mobile usage and internet usage that we have today.
Yeah.
So just want to know, because there's a need of sustainable development as well in the country today. So how does actually Meta look towards to such content, or maybe to such basically content actually, if I would say, to develop them and just to bring a change basically, because I guess digital media is actually a good start to have all of these things.
So, apart from the normal advertiser work that we do, right, which is enable businesses to go digital, we also have what we call social teams within our organization. And the job of the social team is actually not to help monetization, but to actually help government agencies, NGOs, or anyone who has a social message to also reach audience. So, for example, during COVID, some of you might have noticed, right? Facebook used to have an alert going on, right? Where, for example, COVID vaccines are available, or if there is a new COVID alert. Even right now, when there is a natural calamity, earthquake or flood, that alert actually shows up. That's our partnership with the government agency that is actually firing up that. Many times you would also see social messages, like right now you would see a lot of anti-fraud messages that are happening across. That's not paid advertising. That's actually happening because of our tie-up with RBI or SEBI that's helping do investor education on the platform itself. Another way we do that is through channels. So some of you might have seen WhatsApp channels, where we will push specifically channels that send messages that are good for public usage and tell the users to add those in so that you can receive those messages organically. But that's one of the things we do across the globe. It's not just India. And it's something that we believe makes the platform good for usage. And very, very important for Facebook, less for Instagram, but very important for Facebook, very important for WhatsApp as a means of communication across.
Also, I have another question if you just permit me. So just asking this question, I do not know how relevant will it be, but all the influences that we have seen, and somewhere there's a story behind those influencers. Like there's one particular post or video which actually goes viral, and then that's how they actually become a lot public and lot viral. So just want to know, just getting the benefit of this platform basically. So want to know, is there any particular science that goes behind that? Well, because I have heard and seen the story of many of the influencers, so I don't know how relevant will it be, but yes, I have seen and heard it.
There's no science to it. It's what people like. I wish there was a science to it, but it's what people like, and it's continuously changing. I think it's somebody said it. People's taste and what people really like changes a lot. It's very different for India than actually outside India also. So, for example, how important music is for us. I think there's also the importance of memes or humor. It's far more here than any other place. Also, the regionalization of content, like how niche you can make the content so that it talks to your vernacular or your region or place that you come from. That's far more here than anywhere else. We can only surface trends, but it's still not a full guarantee why something will go viral versus not. And as I said, right, because it's the machine really picks up signals basis where they're getting the most engagement, and wherever they're getting the most engagement, they're likely to continue showing that content to you. And that's how the virality builds, right? What we say, the viral build-up, that's how it happens.
I think there are also multiple layers of patterns in multiple different psychographics.
Yes.
So it's almost, I think what the things that go viral are generally just brought into for a broader category of likelihood. And that
Correct.
also immediately changes.
Correct. I agree.
Yes, Tarushi.
Ma'am, thank you for an amazing section. Also, I had one question around. So, in the digital world of today, we have broadly two stakeholders. One is creators, and the others are the users who are consuming the content. So, users at this point are facing this fatigue. So, like the creators are really happy at this point that their content is being consumed, but users are facing this constant fatigue of getting bombarded by various content online. So, like, how is Meta managing both the stakeholders at this point?
Yeah, I would say, Tarushi, caveat emptor. Like, you're the user, you can choose to switch off. So nothing stops anyone from switching off, but nobody is switching off, which makes me feel like maybe there is fatigue, but there's not that much fatigue because people still come back to the surface. And as I said, every user is different, right? There are users, for example, who would tend to have switch off time, like more than 10 minutes, they would not watch Instagram. You can actually put that up if you want.
Yeah.
But it is a user-driven world. I mean, we might not feel like that, but it's a fully user-driven world. You can still choose to switch off if you want to. You can choose to switch off with a time constraint, but the world is not. That is what I'm trying to tell you. There's more and more and more demand for content than people can cater to. There's clearly a question mark on whether people will pay for content. I think that's the tougher question. So let's say if I was to make Instagram for fee tomorrow, right? Like you have to pay a fee to watch, then might be a question mark. But as of now, people have time, they would willingly consume. And it's not just us, it's everywhere else.
Like, totally agreed. It's just like every social media platform is it's like the same thing. So
Yes.
that's the thing.
Yes.
So I think
Try, I can tell you a hack, which is try switching off Ask app not to track. Let Instagram kind of run for 2-3 days. Then it'll give you more generic reels, which anybody will see. Then the system resets. Then again, move the Ask app not to track, and then it resets. So that's a good way to break fatigue. And you would also realize what the word is watching. Like if it doesn't know you are Tarushi and still wants to show what the word is watching, this is what you will see.
thank you, Arman.
Hi, everyone. I have a question that is like besides Meta, general life question. So, like, say 2-3 decades ago, the problem that our parents faced was the problem of circumstance. circumstances, we ऐसे लोग हैं. What we are facing is the problem of choice.
Yes.
We have certain, but I don't know if it's a privilege or it's an unfortunate event. We decide choices. So, what do you think about it? How should we make the choice work?
Well, it's a clear privilege. I wouldn't say it's a it's a real privilege. I would say. Um, See, I think the harder thing is there is just so much to take away your attention from the thing that should really matter, right? But I also think you guys are a far more evolved generation where you're able to multitask far better than we did, right? Like very hard. Even for me to imagine how I could multitask in this world, I would watch reels half the time. So clearly, like, very, very hard for you guys to do well at the one thing that you focus. In terms of managing the choices that you have, I would say I see a lot more people now thinking about their passion. Again, wasn't the trend when I was studying, right? A passion side mein. Whatever makes you money, whatever gives you like a job guarantee, do that. And that's what parents would kind of say. You clearly have far more privilege, for example, in now choosing what works for you. There is a lot more interest, therefore, in choosing things for passion. And that's all good. I think you should absolutely go with passion. But you should also know that passions change. And when whatever you're passionate about goes away in a year or two, it shouldn't be that you lose interest in what you pick to do for the next 5 years of your life. So it's good to choose things for your passion, but also choose something that challenges you, that teaches you something that you wouldn't have learned otherwise. Otherwise, safer choices, at least in today's dynamic world where you have so many changes that are coming, they are likely to lose interest for you in a couple of years. So might be a difficult one, but always choose something that challenges you. For example, like I feel there are such few younger people now that choose sports as a career because it's just hard. It's very hard to do that. It's also sometimes it feels like a very mind dump kind of thing to go and train every day for an event where there is very little chance of success. But I still think it's the best possible skill you can get for a very, very long term career, profession, any place else. So always like kind of think about what challenges you, think about passion, but also think what challenges you.
And also like not be afraid of changing domains because a generalist never hurts nobody. You might as well become a group director at Meta leading 5 domains.
I think in master's degree, what my major takeaway has been to say not to think about choosing a lot and just start doing it. And then that's why they say love business by doing it.
Yeah.
And one more, say I have a thought and I would love to know what you think about it. Whenever someone, say a person who is really big in life says that this is the right time, that you guys are lucky, it's a waiting time to be in, I think it just gives me, say, immense pressure to do well.
नहीं ये रहेगा 10 साल तक. So first of all ऐसा नहीं है कि अभी है कि बाद में चला जाएगा. We are entering into a cycle which is a very positive cycle, right? Like there is no what you say, there is no deficiency of anything. The times where we grew up, or at least when I was studying, there used to be generally a pressure of India is not great at anything, we don't have much available. When I was at IIT, the clear answer was that 90% of the batch has to go outside India to study. I mean, that's where most people went. They went to do their masters and PhD. And now everyone has this itching to come back to India because now is the time, as you just say. But I would say we're getting into a 10-15 year cycle easily. And that's nothing to do with, the government or what has been happening in India or one change or two change. I think it's because we have a demographic dividend which is fairly unique in the world. We see that reflecting in ADEX, we see that reflecting in digitization. We're the largest country market for Meta. So clearly, like a lot of things are falling in place. So first of all, don't take the pressure. You have 10 years, if not more, right, to kind of take advantage of the cycle. So when people tell you that this is a great time, it's so that you don't feel the pressure of making one choice just because this is the only choice that I'm left with.
Yeah.
Because sometimes those choices kind of hurt you later on because you've made that choice thinking, oh, this is the safest choice right now. Let me pick this one up. But then what if you lose interest, or what if AI comes, disrupts that choice? What would you do? So make the choice knowing that there is no pressure for you to make it right now because you have enough of like a cycle ahead of you to make it big.
Thank you for that question. I'm so sorry, guys. We're short on time. So please send your questions to her on LinkedIn. Email address. I'll provide you with both of it. So I think we have a digital expert with us. Past 2 decades, journey started from bus to bucks to the big picture. You've seen it all. You've done it all. It's honestly a pleasure that you are here with us and this amazing set of people. Very insightful, and I think we are taking so much of the career advisory more than about Meta, and we could relate to so many things. Thank you so much, Shweta,
Thank
for
you.
being here today. Honestly, it's a pleasure. I mean it.
Thank you, Jayashree. And thank you for the questions. Very interesting. Really made me think. So thank you for that.